Good morning, my friends. It is 9:45 on the AM dial, and you know what that means? It's time for Java with Jen. Java with Jen. Can I say summer? I love iced coffee, and I'm not like I don't get people get like brands that promote them or whatever. I do not, but there's this thing called Nut Pods that has an unsweetened cinnamon, and I am not a person who likes flavor in my coffee, but the unsweetened cinnamon is the bomb. I'm just letting you know. That's my little plug for unsweetened cinnamon. Here's my plug for my book. But first, I'm so rude. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Jen Koken, and I am your favorite, yes, I said it, executive leadership coach for women in STEM who are looking to stop trying to fit in and feel like a chameleon and lead like themselves, lead with authority, have the ability to inspire their team and leave a legacy that's worth leaving. All this month of June, I'm going to be having one of my favorite people, Jess Sato, on Java with Jen with me. And at the end of the month, you'll get to spend a whole hour with the two of us. And what we're going to be breaking down is something called, we are calling, and it's going to be a conversation. You know how this rolls. The confidence code. And I want to do two things. I want to read you Jess's bio because it's quite impressive, and give you a little bit of what this particular episode is going to be about. All right, so here's Jess's bio. She is a business growth and visibility strategist who helps impact-driven women transform their scattered brilliance into one bold, crystal clear message that fuels real momentum. Known for her signature BOLT method, B-O-L-T method, Jess guides high-achieving female entrepreneurs and thought leaders to uncover their big idea. And I'm saying, like, if you're listening, I'm air quoting, I'm like a big idea, because Jess is going to break down what she calls their big idea so they can align their offers, their visibility strategy, and their leadership around it and step confidently into thought leadership. Her work really bridges the gap between clarity and traction so her clients can grow purpose-driven businesses that make real impact and real money. And the reason I wanted Jess on here for the month of June is because, you know, part of the way we're moving through the Executive Presence Accelerator is it is 3 modules. First month, internal game of leadership. Second month, external game of leadership as it relates to you and your team. And then we get into what is it to leave a legacy, because you don't wait to leave a legacy, people. You start leaving it now. And so I've known Jess for a bunch of years now, and her whole bent take on what the big idea is has always impressed me. So we are going to start today with the big idea that starts it all, how you can recognize that clarity starts with legacy starts with clarity and not hustle. I've talked a lot about her. Now let me bring her in, and let me get her in here to join me. Hey, Jess, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I know it is a little bit earlier there in Colorado, 7:45.
Yes, it is.
She did
Yes.
it. She's so nice. She really is a true friend. So I'm so excited to get this conversation started with you, because you have been talking about, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. I'm going to say it anyway, and I'll get the pushback. You have done a lot of coaching with women figuring out the big idea for TEDx talks.
That's
And
correct.
that's where your BOLT framework came from. And that's where this whole business of a big idea comes from, because that's what TED talks about, is what's your big idea. What is an idea worth? Something.
Sharing was their old tag. I can't remember what their new one is.
Something like that. And I think I said this before, but I just think it's important that we start thinking about this now. And a lot of the women I've coached through the years are at that point of what is my thought leadership. Many of them can't get out of the day to day. And I feel like having you here, they can start to think about what is their big idea. So I've said that word a lot, and this is just what I want to cover today. What in the holy tarnation is a big idea?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love this question because it is steeped in a lot of thoughts. And when people tend to hear big idea, they think big, life-changing, world-changing, earth-shattering kind of things. That is not what I think of as a big idea. To me, your big idea really is, I think of it as like that big, bold through line that unites all of your work, that brings your experience, your expertise, who you are, your passion all together into to the extent we can, a single core statement so that when you're out there talking, when you are leading, when you are building a business, everything is filtered through that. It almost becomes this lens that we use. And one of the ways that I tend to define big idea is it is that audacious concept or perspective that challenges the status quo, demands attention, and inspires action.
Say that again.
Challenges the status quo,
Yep.
demands attention,
Yep.
and inspires action.
Mm.
Here's why I think challenging the status quo is normal, especially if you're an entrepreneur. This is also true for leaders, but this is very certainly true for entrepreneurs. There's so much messaging, so much stuff out in the ecosystem. And over time, we all start to sound a lot alike. We start to have the same perspective if we're in the same industries. And one of the quickest, most honest ways is to have a point of view about something. And when that point of view pushes back against commonly held beliefs or standard practices within an industry that you look at and you think, I don't totally agree with that. Well, now all of a sudden you have something that stands out differently. And when you build around that perspective or that point of view, now all of a sudden you stand out. And I think the same is true for leaders as well. When you are speaking differently about the things that you're seeing, raising questions and curiosities about it, all of a sudden it pings differently for a lot of people.
I'm glad that you said that because as soon as when you were saying what you're saying, I'm like, yes. And women in STEM,
Yeah.
so much of what I see is we feel like we've had to fit in and there's a mold and there's a way that things are done.
Yeah.
And, it's LinkedIn Live. So I'm not going to say F that poo-poo,
But F that, right?
but F that poo-poo, and
Yeah.
I also want to make sure folks who are watching understand this is not, oh, my thought leadership once I've reached a certain level. You
No.
are brand new as an individual contributor, particular for women. I just had I'm sponsoring mentoring a young woman who just moved to my area to be a mechanical engineer, and she's in her late 20s. And she's been in the work world, but she went from an established company to a startup.
Mm.
Very different atmosphere. And
Mhm.
she's trying to figure out her footing. And I said, look, number one, you don't have to try to fit in to whatever
Mhm.
the mold is in this
That's right.
company. Chart your course.
Mhm.
So what advice, if any, is your advice different for someone who's an individual contributor or a new manager, distinct from somebody who's senior level, a senior leader or in the C-suite?
Mm.
Do you feel like this is why I'm
That's a
asking
great
this question?
question.
Do you feel like once I'm in the C-suite, I can take more risks to buck the status quo, and maybe I don't feel as free to do that or
Hmm.
something?
That's a great question.
Thank you. I'll be here all week.
I think this probably warrants more thought, but I think this actually happens in 3 phases over the course of a career. In
Mm,
your early career, I actually think you're rewarded a lot for going against the grain. And you can say things, do things that are a little bit more barrier pushing, and people see that as, oh, this is a go-getter. So in your earlier career, at least this has been my experience having worked with a
yeah,
lot
yeah.
of leaders, there's usually some reward for being a little countercultural. You think differently, people see that you're thinking differently, you're speaking differently, asking different questions, and you actually get rewarded for that. Then there comes a point, and I think this is sort of mid-career, where, yeah, you're still a go-getter, you have a proven track record, but now there's this weird safety thing that happens, and you tend to mute down a little bit. I
Mm,
I think that's sort of normal, but I do think you have to work harder to say the thing that you really want to say because that it does feel maybe a little riskier. And then when you get to the C-suite, I think there's actually a little bit more latitude, and people are expecting you to have that sort of bolder perspective. You are a leader, and so I don't know. I kind of want to give this a little bit more thought, but I think there is a little bit of an arc that
Yeah.
happens over the course of a career, and when more boldness is seemingly rewarded than others.
Interesting, because as you were
Mm,
speaking about those and, we're gonna be coming all month, so,
mhm.
uh, I'll say more about what you and I have already kind of teed up the questions, but we never know where these episodes are gonna go, or the lives are gonna go. I don't know what to call it. It's a live, is it a podcast, is it a whatever? Doesn't matter, here we are. Anywho, um, what struck me was I love the idea of a go-getter, you're bucking the system, and then you get to the C-suite, you have more latitude. I'm wondering, it's a curiosity I
Mm,
have, in that middle space, have you been sucked into the culture because we no longer can see the water we're swimming in because we're just swimming?
mm.
I don't know.
It's a it's a really good question. Yeah. Well, and I think that's a little bit what I mean. It's like there's a weird safety that's happening there where you're being pressed, especially if you're a middle manager, right? You're being pressed on both
I
sides.
was about to
So
say,
there's a
yep,
you have to sort of adhere and you have to manage, and that has to be in alignment. You're an interesting bridge. And so what maybe you could have done to push back is more muted because it's just the sort of the overwhelm of being in that role.
yeah,
Um, but I do think, now that as I'm sort of thinking this out loud, I do think those leaders who are still pushing back and challenging, they are still rewarded if it's done in a certain way. And so that to me is the greater challenge. It's less about what you're saying and more about how are you bringing the fullness of who you are to the conversation in such a rich way.
I that's a great segue for a way to end, actually. So I want to say a couple of things. One is because number one, how do you bring that fullness, that richness?
Mhm.
For years, and I'm sure you experienced the same thing, like, I thought I had to be very, buttoned up and never show
Mhm.
emotion until I finally figured out, no, I was actually I didn't have to be a chameleon, and the thing I was afraid of was being my full self, my intuition,
Mhm.
my femininity, showing my emotions, caring.
Yeah.
Once I did that, I stopped being exhausted. And I actually, what totally shocked me, I just did an email about this last night to my newsletter list. What shocked me was how accepting people
Yeah.
were. And the other reason I love that, and this is why I talk about women leading with authority. It's not about power, it's about
Mm.
authentically
Yeah.
being yourself. And how do we figure that out at the end of the day? Separate
Yeah.
from being a mom, being a sister, being a daughter,
Mhm.
being a
Yep.
whomever, what do we want and who are we and what's that
Mhm.
sole purpose, raison d'etre that we wanna bring to a
Mhm.
company? What's that point of view that you were
Yeah.
talking about when we first began the conversation?
Yeah. I feel like, uh, you're right. There is so much acceptance when people show up fully. Like, people
Yeah,
it's almost like people honor this in you, in the courage it takes to do that, especially if you're in an environment that is going against the grain. So, that to me, I think speaks to part of what we're gonna continue talking about, which is how do we be in alignment? How do we show up and bring that fullness? Um, Ideas, perspective, leadership style, all of it. How do we bring all of that to the table in a
how
really
do we bring
powerful way?
yeah, how do we bring all of it to the table? So, listen, everybody, presence isn't built, it's remembered. The big idea isn't something you invent, you claim it. So it's not like you have to go, at least from my perspective, I think it's sitting and just tuning in with your heart and
Mhm.
understanding what that point of view is and how do you want to be perceived and known and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
the next episode, we're going to be talking about, like, okay, once someone has their big idea, what to do with it. But what's a question between now and next week
Mm.
that somebody could engage in to begin that thought process? What would be an easy entry point?
Yeah. So one of the questions I get a lot from people is like, how do I figure out my big idea? Right. Because to
Yeah,
your point, we think it's like something and we arrive. But the reality is like there's a bit of an excavation that happens here. And it's rooted almost like Venn diagram style in experience and expertise, passion, and then where's that need? in the ecosystem, whether that's in a workspace or a business context. And I think the easiest place to begin is, what are you passionate about? When you look at your industry or your business community or what have you, what really fires you up when you think about that, like something in there,
Yeah.
what really gets you fired up? And
Yeah.
that's where we start. And then we pull in these other elements. So I would ask people, what is happening in your industry or within the business that you look at and you think, I do not agree with that. I don't agree with that approach. I I just fundamentally am against this practice or this paradigm or this, fill in the right word. And think about what that is and why do you feel that way? And then we start to flip it on its head and say, okay, well, what is my
Yeah.
perspective?
I
What
love
is my
that.
perspective?
What it reminds me of is the whole lean in circles. And there's a
Yeah.
woman who wrote a book called Lean Out.
Yeah.
She was like, I'm not going to lead like a man. And I feel like she had some beef with Sheryl Sandberg, but there's a new book out called Careless People that is a
I've
much,
heard about that.
yeah, much more deep dive. And I
Mm.
just asked for that from the library. So anyway, that was a total like tangent, but that's okay. Sometimes we're like squirrel. There it goes.
Yeah.
All right. So folks, if you're sitting here wondering, do I even have a big idea? That is your cue to join us live on June 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern, me and Jess, for the Empowering Expert Series. You're going to spend an hour with us unpacking exactly how to find and lead from that core idea. Don't wait till you're ready. Come as you are. That's where confidence begins. I will make sure once we're done, once we hang up, to put the link in the comments so that you can register. And Jess, I'm very excited to come back next week and
Yes.
figure out, like, now I got it. Now what? Which is always
Can't
a
wait.
good question.
Yes.
Now what? Yeah.
Can't wait.
All right, everybody, tune in next Wednesday, 9:45, 7:45 for Jess, sorry, on the AM dial when we have another episode of Java with Jen and Jess. Java with Jen and Jess. All right, friends. Ciao, ciao for now.